Hello BookTube. Recently, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club did a great video called On Reading for Pleasure, where he talks about the fact that realizing that books, even canonical books, even greatly revered canonical works, were written by people, ordinary people, and that usually they were written in order to be enjoyed, that they were written for entertainment, has helped him to remove an element of those canonical works that always bothers me. It's always my main obstacle whenever I talk these works, which is the element of intimidation. It helps to remove that element when you remember that the people who wrote these books were ordinary people. They put their pants on one leg at a time, for those of you who are into pants wearing. And that they, in most cases, 99.9% of cases, they wanted you to read their work. They wanted you to enjoy it, to get something out of it. There's a contract here. It's not that they are reserved figures carved in marble up on a mountain, much though they might like you to think so. No, that in fact, they have a stall open in a market, and you're a potential customer. That helps a lot to even the playing field, and I like that. I loved the video where Matthew was making those points, and it reminded me of points like this that I have made many, many times to people who were intimidated by, for instance, the Iliad, or the gigantic read-along that Matthew and I will be doing in July on James Boswell's Life of Johnson, which is absolutely enormous and seems forbiddingly recondite. An 18th century intellectual getting an 1,100-page biography. Most readers would look at that and say, well, okay, no matter how well history thinks of it, it's not really for me. And the whole point that Matthew's trying to make here is that it is. It is. That once you get past those artificial elements of intimidation, whole worlds open up to you. And I was asking myself, I was saying, well, Matthew's video, and this subject just in general, actually it boils down to the Ars Poetica of my beloved Horace, in which he mentions that the function of, he mentioned poetry, but literature, it's been extended to literature many times over the ensuing 2,000 years, is that the function of literature is to instruct and entertain. And the question forever afterwards has been the balance between those two. And how you map, I wondered when I was watching Matthew's video, what is the best way to map, to plot the interaction between those two elements, those two purposes of literature. And you just hear some of your favorite booktubers promptly answering that question. Olive, for instance, would immediately say, use a spreadsheet. Before you'd even finish saying the question, she'd have said, use a spreadsheet. And David Murphy might say, well, financial analysis is probably in order here, and the numerator would be this, and let me explain it until you're looking for the nearest door or perhaps window. And Mark Richardson and Richardson Reeves might say, well, what you want here is a 10-part plan, and it's got to be so clear that even those pencil-neck paper pushers on the town council will understand it. And so on and so forth, right down the line. And no, I'm afraid not. It's not any of those things. The best way to graph this, to chart the interaction between those two missions of literature, is with our old friend math. As you all know, I love math. I think it's the greatest thing, the true universal language. And so I have made a quadratic equation for the Horatian compromise between instruction and entertainment. As you can see, we're in 4 quadrants here. Now the top 2 quadrants, on one hand you have the element of information, of informing the reader, raised to the 1,000,000th power. And on the other top quadrant you have the element of entertaining the reader, raised to the 1,000,000th power. And then the lower quadrants are the elements of informing the reader, only it's negative 100,000,000th. So it's lowered, it's decreased to an infinitesimal amount. And the same thing is true with the lower quadrant entertainment element. It's negative 1,000,000 as a superscript, and those are the quadrants that are possible for all literature. You'll notice that I did not put infinity in any of these places, and that's because the infinite exponent of instruction is not books, right? Obviously. Your own personal experience will certainly have taught you that. Instruction raised to an infinite exponent will not be books. It will be interpersonal, it will be raw experience, it will be when your car slides on the ice, that sort of thing. That is the ultimate in instruction. And the same thing is true with the ultimate in entertainment. I realize there are all age levels in the room, so I will tread carefully. But let's just put it in the most euphemistic terms possible and say that the ultimate expression of entertainment in human experience does not take the form of books. I know a lot of you are bookworms, but I trust that a lot of you know this. The ultimate forms of expression of entertainment, the infinite, raised to an infinite exponent, you leave books behind. So that's why I put numbers on here. But as you can see, these are going to interact with each other in some ways. Never in this way, right? No book, it's just a logical inconsistency. No book can be both infinitely, or let's say effectively infinitely informative, and effectively infinitely non-informative. So these are never going to interact with each other. But these are going to interact with each other, and these are going to interact with each other, right? Because something can be, for instance, let's see, I have some examples here. Something can be enormously informative, but not at all entertaining. And the example that I have here, but you can come up with a whole bunch of them. The example that I have here is the Turner Diaries, the Bible of the Klan, the Bible of the current movement of alt-right white supremacy racism in the world, is the Turner Diaries. Reading it will not entertain you at all. It is a loathsome reading experience, but it will instruct you enormously. Suddenly you will have a gigantic breviary of secret codes and vocabulary terms that will make sense if you ever descend into the world of the alt-right. It will make sense of almost everything that you see, almost every reference, almost every name, almost every allusion. Everybody in the Charlottesville, tiki torch extreme alt-right knows this book well. And it's possible that in the 21st century, you will be exposed to that world whether you want to be or not. So in that sense, the Turner Diaries is maximally informative and minimally entertaining. It's not entertaining at all. Apart even from the horrible stuff that is in it, it's a dreadful piece of work, just dreadful. But on the other hand, you also have the other axis here. You have things that are maximally entertaining, although they are minimally instructive. Like, for instance, Meg by Steve Alton, which is a novel about a giant prehistoric albino killer shark rampaging in the modern world. Aside from the fact that megalodons did once exist in the world, nothing in the instruction part of Meg can be taken with anything but a truckload of salt. You cannot rely on any of the science, so-called, in Meg. But boy, oh boy, is it entertaining. So that's a case where something can go in that opposite direction, where you've got a maximum entertainment and a minimum of instruction. And it's also possible to go sideways. As you can see, I've got little bubbles here of examples, but there are many of other examples of books that are both maximally instructive and maximally entertaining. And also minimally. So from maximally instructive and maximally entertaining, I have a few books here. Behave by Robert Sapolsky. The Ancestor's Tale by Richard Dawkins. Not one of his anti-religion screeds, but instead a wonder, a treasure trove of wonder on every page. Connections by James Burke, bit of an oldie but a goodie. It was the companion volume to a BBC series, but the companion volume, the book itself, is wonderful. And the last one I have mentioned here is Cleopatra by Stacy Schiff, which is another perfect example of something that is both as entertaining as it can possibly be and as instructive as it can possibly be. So you're not sacrificing one element for the other when you read books like that. And unfortunately, there are books at the other end of the spectrum. There are books that are neither entertaining nor instructing. So in a sense, worse even than the Turner Diaries. Or Meg, which is saying a lot. I have a few of those listed here as well. Obvious stuff like, for instance, outdated computer instruction manuals, where the language that 800 pages and the language has moved on. So aside from historical purposes, these things are going to have no instruction value whatsoever. Or, for instance, most campaign biographies for Western candidates, especially post-1980, most such books, Time to Lead, Decisions to Make, Time to Win, Winning on the Horizon, all this sort of stuff. They are written by the most egregious hacks in the world. They have no merit whatsoever. They don't reflect on the candidate. The candidate has never heard of them, never read them, never vetted them, and none of the policies that are laid out in those campaign biographies are beholden on the candidate if they achieve office at all. There are huge contradictions all the time between the planks that are laid out in those books, they have no functional value, even for information's sake. They're just a complete waste of time. Take it from someone who knows. I've read a huge number of them. Also, to use a specific example, little Todd Burpo wrote a book called Heaven is Real. A little boy wrote a book with a significant amount of help from his minister father about the time he spent in heaven, how he almost died and he went to heaven and he walked around and saw all sorts of things, saw Granny, and then came back and told everybody about it. And it was catnip to the American evangelical wingnut wing of fundamentalism, because it was a little boy out of the mouths of babes, suffer little children to come unto me. It was you can't suspect that there's any kind of motive involved here, even though his father is even though this is helping his church. He didn't go to a Buddhist afterlife. After all, he didn't go to Valhalla. But the whole fundamental spiel was, we can't think that there's any ulterior motive here. It's a little boy. Little children are innocent. This must mean that it's all true, which was just fine as a marketing tactic until Todd Burpo recanted it all. said none of this happened. I made it all up. And that renders whatever minimal instructional value that Heaven is Real might have had null and void, right? You can't. I know there are people who do in the fundamentalist Bible Belt of America. I'm sure there are people who do say that, yeah, this is all true. This is all exactly right. This is just what it will be like, and just ignore the fact that the kid who thought it all up admits now that he was lying, that he made it up out of whole cloth, that he didn't have those experiences. I'm sure there are people who just disconnect those two, but most people will see his recantation of that book as the ultimate evisceration of any value that it has. It's not only a flight of fantasy that can't be grounded in anything observable or testable, but it's an abandoned flight of fantasy, so that would count as being on the bottom rung here. And the other thing that I have listed here will come as no surprise. Another thing that shares the quality of being maximally uninformative with being maximally unentertaining would be all works of philosophy ever written. they all are right at the bottom of that rung. And there you have it. See what quadratic equations can do for us that spreadsheets or action plans for the library can't do? This is what I was thinking about when I was watching Matthew's video. I'll leave a link to his video down below, because it's a thought starter. It's a conversation starter. Where do you fit on this graph this highly scientific graph that I have made? I am presuming that none of you voluntarily want to read anything that combines the bottom rungs. But where do you stand in terms of the cross-pollination at the top? How much do you need a book to be informative? And how much does that excuse how little it's entertaining, or vice versa? Are you perfectly happy for instance, are you perfectly happy to stay in this quadrant and never go anywhere else, if you can? Or conversely, are you perfectly happy to stay in this quadrant, only informative, that you don't really need that kind of jolt of visceral joy, that you don't really need that part of the Horatian compromise? Where do you fit on this quadrant? I'm assuming it's up here somewhere, or somewhere in the axis between these two, but not just down at the bottom. Although I'm sure there are some philosophy fans out there that I haven't reached yet. But anyway, I couldn't let the subject go without discussing it, because I have discussed this many, many, many times. What are the injectors? You've got injectors into the fuel tank. What kind of combination, what kind of percentages do you typically put in? All entertainment, no instruction? All instruction, no entertainment, some balance of the two? I'd love to hear it. I would love to hear it. So I'll leave a link to Matthew's video, and this is going to come in handy because, keep in mind, we are doing a read-along of Boswell's Life of Johnson, which has been typically viewed by people who don't know anything about it as being down here, having no useful information and no entertainment value. And Matthew and I are going to make a case that it's up here. So it bears thinking about where you fit on this graph and what you require of the things you read. Feel free to sound off in the comments, or also in email. I will leave my email on every video. Feel free to write to me, just as long as you don't expect an immediate, in-depth response, because I get a lot of emails every day. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. Who doesn't love a good discussion video? But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.